So we're continuing Unit 8. We finished the first half. We're going on the second half, page 10. For the Menucha of Surnamed Dangur Surmos Matifiori, says the Mishnah that I just read before from the Yerushalmi. So that has to be the ideal utilization. Why? Because yain chometz should be right. Says the Rambam. I'm going to skip the Rambam because I want to get to the difficult part. The difficult part is this Mishnah. So the question is, right, so if I have wine, am I allowed to use the wine to get rid of ants? Assuming that works. Right? Am I allowed to use oil for other uses as lotions? So it depends what oil. All right. So here what we're talking about is using one product not for the, I guess, ideal use. In other words, the ideal use is eating, so you're not use it for rubbing. But what about other sense of ideal use? This is a Mishnah in Trumot, the Rambam that we see from a few places, applies also to Shmita. Nosim tmarim dvash, v'lo tepuchim yain, v'lo sitvaniot chometz. So you're not allowed to make silan, for example, out of Shmita or Truma dates. Well, let's take the Truma because we're going to see that it's not so simple. But let's take the silan and cider. Are you allowed to take Truma apples and make cider out of them? The Mishnah says you're not allowed. Why not? Why can't you turn the apples into cider? Why can't you take the dates and turn them into silan? Why not? So we're going to look at three reasons this evening. We're probably going to look at the first. Let's start with our choshev. But the question, is the question clear? Right. Again, we have to use that. You have to utilize in the ideal utilization. What is the ideal utilization? So previously we saw the ideal utilization is to drink, to eat, as opposed to rubbing and things like that. What about processing for other food? So if I have dates, am I allowed to make silan out of them? Right? It says you're allowed to make truma dates into silan. Why not exactly? So let's see. It says Aruch HaShulchan. At least I mean, we're gonna have to understand. It's a big ki'ilu nafkamina. Are you allowed to make beer out of Shmita barley? Are you allowed to make whiskey out of Shmita wheat? So there, l'chora, it's the same question. L'chora. Now, I will say that the truth is there's no actual practical nafkamina because we'll never have wheat or barley that's Shmita that you're allowed to eat because it'll always be sfichim because it grows in the wrong season. So you'll never have Shmita wheat. Just saying. But that's a side point. Anyway, says Aruch HaShulchan, יש להסתפק אם מותר לתת צהורים בשיכר בשביעית. וכן לעשות מדגן יש וכיוצא בזה, משום דין החשיבים בברתן כזה. ודילמה, כיוון דרך העולם בכך, חווה כירק שדרכו לאכול מבושל שמותר לבשלו. אבל גם דשם אין דרכו לאכול חי ואין לאכלו חי, כאדרבה, עיקרה נפת. מכל מקום, כיוון שדרך העולם בכך, אי אפשר לעשות שיכר ויש באופן אחר מותר. מה שפירות אחרים אסור לסוחתם, זה מפני שאין דרך העולם להוציא מהם משכין, אבל שיכר ויש, כל העולם עושים כן. So you see the Aruch HaShulchan, he says, I only care about one thing. What is normal? He says, why can't you make cider out of apples? Because most people don't do it. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it's just not really done. But what about creating whiskey? That is done. What about beers? They're actually excellent. They're excellent beer. What do you call it? What's it called? Places to make beers. The word. But not distilleries. That's whiskey. The beers are
breweries.
Breweries. Thank you. Yes, excellent. Right. We have excellent breweries in Israel. Mamash, excellent ones. And it's a big thing. It's a big thing in Israel. So that's normal. It should be normal enough, right? On the other hand, I don't know. Is that really what the most barley is used for? It's a good question. So Aruch HaShulchan, the whole discussion as far as Aruch HaShulchan is concerned seems to be what is the prevalent use. So there, that seems to be Aruch HaShulchan, the way Aruch HaShulchan is looking at it. See Rav Kook. כל שינוי צורה שאינו נהוג על פי רוב. לכן שנינו בתוספתא קטניות של תרומה הם עושים מהם תחינין. וודאי נזדמן הדבר שעושים מהם תחינין, אלא שמסתמן זה דרך הרוב. גם ישר קטניות מציעים לפעמים שעושים פת, בכל מקום אסור לעשות כאן בשל תרומה, או דין בשביעית משום שינוי ברירתן, כפי שאינו שינוי משום אוכל למשקה. Meaning, what am I allowed to process? The answer is, what in other years is mostly processed. Right? So why are you allowed to make wine? Because most grapes are made into wine. What about rapeseed? Does anyone know what we do with rapeseed? Anyone know? Rapeseed is processed is what we call, every one of you has this in his house, I'm sure.
Canola.
Canola, thank you. Canola oil, right? We're all the Canadians when we need them. Right? Canola oil, discovered in Canada. Canola oil is made out of rapeseed. There's no question you're allowed to make canola oil out of rapeseed if you do that in Israel, and if it's not tzvichim, it's complicated. But assuming there is such a thing, there's no question you're allowed. Why? Because that's the main use of rapeseed by far, by a long shot, right? But what about other things? Now here it becomes complicated in Rav Kook. What about making hummus? Right, making tchina. So we have to start saying, what is most sesame used for? Is most sesame used as sesame? Is most sesame used as tchina? I think the answer is tchina. I think. Check it, but I'm pretty sure most is right. Okay, what about barley? All right, so check that. Meaning, the question is, he agrees. He's at this point. Don't worry, he'll have a few more chumers later on. But his point is, check what it's mostly used for, and then we'd say if it's 51%. Again, can we really say 51%? If as long as it's most of it is used for that, you're allowed.
So we say grapes are mostly used for wine, or grapes are mostly used for eating?
So first of all, I think grapes are mostly used for wine, though I think that's the true answer. I'm pretty sure that most grapes are used for wine. You have to remember that to have a liter of wine, you need a lot more than a liter of grapes, right? Just right, remember that. But there's also another issue, which is we're going to see from a few makarot that wine and also olive oil specifically have their own thing. With wine and olive oil, even if most people will eat grapes, this is like the Torah already told us that Kadosh Baruch Hu really made grapes for wine and made olives for oil. Just we see that from some poskim, but the important thing I wanted to show is the Aruch HaShulchan is not sure how to define it, right? What is the prevalent use? And Rav Kook says, no pirov. Are you allowed to process it? The answer is, are you allowed to process poetry? The answer is, what is done on pi rov. Now, Chazon Ish is a very interesting discussion. I'm just going to say this about pen, and then I'm going to get you guys off. Chazon Ish says an interesting point. He says, okay, if you live in Israel, are most oranges in Israel processed for orange juice? I think the answer is no. Okay, what about in Florida? Glenn?
I don't know.
You don't know. But my guess is yes. Now, I think most fruit most of the oranges that are grown in Florida is used for orange juice, right? Now, why is that? Why is it that in Israel it's not used for orange juice and in Florida it is? Is that because one of them is weird? One of them is strange? One of them has a totally different culture? It could be a cultural thing, right? It could be a cultural thing. So two options, Bigadol. Usually the Rishonim say there are three options why different people do different things in different places, right? Three options. Option number one place they're weird, and one place they're not. And then you have to define normal. All right. The Gemara says that, right? Right? Even if everyone does it, the Gemara says it. Even if they do it, they're just crazy. They're just weird. right? The Gemara says that about carrying things on your head. The Gemara says even if you live in a place where people carry things on their head and they know of such place, they cite specific places. In those places, people carry things on their head, they're just weird. We don't count that. That's not a halacha, right? That's not considered carrying on Shabbos because they're just weird, as the Gemara says. The other thing is different culture, right? The cultural norm. If by us people eat oranges, and the culture in America is a culture of drinking orange juice, so we'll have different cultures and therefore we'll act differently. The third option is the prevalence, meaning when I have so many oranges that I could provide orange juice to all of America, so I'm going to make orange juice. In Israel, we don't have enough. So orange juice is very expensive. And that's why we don't make as much, because we don't have as much. If we had as much as that in Florida, we would. Right? Now, so he says, so Chazon Ish says, when I want to talk about prevalence, so both Aruch HaShulchan and Rav Kook talked about prevalence. So you say, okay, but why isn't it prevalent here? Why is it prevalent in another place? So Chazon Ish says like this: if the reason it's prevalent here and not there is because they're weird, or because the culture here doesn't accept that, then you're not allowed to do it on Shmita. But if the reason they don't do it here is because it just isn't enough, but if we had the same exact situation as the same background situation that Florida has, that would be normal. Then it's normal enough, even if it's not normally used. Meaning, in Israel, if only 20% of the oranges are used for orange juice, am I allowed to make orange juice on Shmita? Rav Kook would say no. Since no. You're reading Chazon Ish wrong, the Rav Kook wrong, because if you were in Florida, 80% of the oranges are used for juice. Why? Because when I say what is the most, my point isn't what do people do here. I'm using the most to discuss a human norm. Why is that? I want to go deeper. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave the Shmita fruit for us to use. Now, he wants us to use it normally. And how do I define normally? The way most people use it. And I say, okay, define most people. So I say, all right, if there's a strange culture, again, it's very interesting that they're very unwoke, right? They're very not politically correct here. They say there's a culture that's normal, a culture that's strange, right? But if there's a culture that's odd to us, so we say, all right, even if they do it there, they're just odd to us. But if I say, well, if I had the same background, right? If I had the same situation that they have, would I act differently? And the answer is no. If I had tons of oranges that are cheap, I'd make a lot of orange juice for sure. I just don't. Say, all right, so you're allowed to make it on Shmita because when I asked what do most people use oranges for, my question wasn't what is the specific cultural norm here considering how expensive oranges are. The question is orange juice something normal enough to make out of oranges? So I say, well, only 30% is used for that. So I say, well, so that means a bunch of rich people use it. I say, yeah, but the reason only 30% is because it's very expensive here. But in other places, most oranges are used for that. I say, oh, that changes things. You see the difference? The Chazon Ish's point is, you don't have to look at you shouldn't. Looking at the prevalence in this specific place, the way specific culture here works, they should ask, what is a human norm? And then you could also look at other human norms and say, well, they do it there because it's normal enough. They're doing it there. The fact that most people do it there shows me it's normal enough. Why don't I do it here? Not because they're weird and I'm normal, or I'm normal, or I'm weird and they're normal. And because we just have we're living in different worlds. So there.